I am Tamara, and today I'm going to walk you through the very easy steps so that you can make an awesome spider web hexagon table runner like this one here. And if you don't want it to look like a spider web, I will show you how to adjust those triangles and the strips so that you can make a hexagon table runner like this one here. Now, check out the link in the description down below. It will go to my blog. In that blog, I have everything linked that I've used in this tutorial, and all of the measurements are there as well. So you can watch this video, and then later on, if you want to double check something, you can check out that blog post and it will all be there as well. All right, let's get sewing. You will need a ruler that has a 60-degree angled line on it. My bottom ruler happens to have two, which I find really handy, and my top ruler has one 60-degree angle on it. Either ruler will work for this project. I will also link to a few good rulers in the description down below. For the classic spiderweb hexagon table topper, you will want each fabric strip to be from a different fabric. That way, when you piece all of your triangles together, it will create this fun spider web looking pattern here. But you don't have to stop there. Because we're working with equilateral triangles, you can actually take these triangles and spin them around to do other designs as well. Now on the top sample here, it will be a bit simpler. You've got that center fabric that is its own fabric, but then you have a matching piece of fabric on either side of it, and then matching again on either outer edge. By doing it this way, you will create a nice table topper where all of the strips can line up and go all the way around neatly. And once again, you can always flip these triangles around to create other patterns as well. Quick interruption here. I just want to tell you that next week's tutorial is actually also a hexagon table topper, but it will allow you to do more specific things. So I highly recommend you check out that tutorial. I will have it linked in the description below once it's up. And if you hit that subscribe button, you won't lose me on YouTube and you'll be able to find that tutorial as well. All right, let's keep on sewing. So depending on what style you've chosen, you will need between 3 to 5 different prints. Making sure that they are non-directional prints is best, and you will need to double check that the fabric that you're buying off the bolt is at least 42 inches from selvage to selvage, or width of fabric. Then take your ruler and rotary cutter and cut 2.5-inch strips of fabric from all of the fabrics that you plan on using. You will end up with 5 strips of fabric total. And a quick little tip, if you don't want your ruler to slide around, I like to use a nice weight on the one side of my ruler while I'm cutting. It helps my ruler not slide, so I get a nice straight cut. Then it's time to press all 5 strips of fabric nice and flat, getting rid of that center fold crease. Then lay all 5 strips together in the pattern that you want, lining up the one edge. Then you will sew the 2 bottom strips together and the 2 top strips together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you do have a 1/4 inch sewing foot, now is the time to use that. I find a 1/4 inch sewing foot to be super helpful when you are sewing those 1/4 inch seams. Then you will do the same thing by taking those 2 sections of fabric, opening them up and attaching them to that center piece of fabric so that you now have all 5 strips of fabric sewn together and lined up on the one edge. Then grab your iron and press all of those seams open. And this is what your fabric will look like once it's all pressed and ready to go. Now to cut our triangles. Lay your fabric so it is right side face up and align the bottom edge along the bottom edge of one of the lines on your cutting mat. Then line that 60-degree line that's on your ruler along the same line on your cutting mat. Cut up towards that top edge. Now that left piece of fabric there is obviously not a triangle, that's just scraps. You can toss that aside. Then you will turn your ruler so you've got your other 60-degree angle, line it up towards the point and along the bottom edge of your fabric, And then once again, you will cut up, creating your first triangle. The first triangle that you cut will have its point at the top of the triangle, but the next triangle that you cut is actually going to have its point face down. So flip your ruler around and you can actually line up that 60-degree line on your ruler along the edge of your triangle and then cut upwards. And you will do this along the entire strip of fabric, ending up with 6 triangles total. Now, before we move on completely, I do want to show you how to cut with that other ruler, because this ruler only has one 60-degree line on it. So you can easily line it up along the bottom edge like we've done before and cut out your triangle. But then when you want to do the upside down triangle, it's easiest to just turn your ruler over completely, then use that same 60-degree line, just lining it up with your cutting mat, and then you can cut upwards. Just be a little bit more aware when you're using your ruler upside down, as it might slip around a little bit more. So using that weight on the top edge will really help in this situation. Next, lay out all 6 triangles in the pattern that you want for your hexagon table topper. Then you need to connect the top 3 triangles together and the bottom 3 triangles together. To do this, split the triangles so you've got 3 on the bottom and 3 on the top, and then sew your triangles so the outer triangles are being attached to the center triangle. So as you can see here, I am lining up my seams and I am pinning them neatly together. Then you will sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance along that pinned edge. So as you can see here, we've got our triangle. This is to represent the triangle stacked. Then you're going to sew that 1/4 inch seam from the bottom edge up to that top point. But what will make it easier in the next step is if you stop a 1/4 inch from that top point and do a back stitch. Then when you do the other side, you'll do the same thing, pin everything in place, sew from that bottom edge up towards that center point, stopping a 1/4 inch from that top point. This will essentially create a triangle of stitches holding these 3 pieces together. Use this method to sew the bottom 3 triangles together and the top 3 triangles together. Once you have your 2 halves, take it to your iron and press those seams open once again before sewing these 2 sections together. Then pin these 2 sections together, lining up all of those seams. And then for that center point, I find it's actually best to just push out those seams so that you can actually see the full point of the fabric nice and flat. You can also trim away some of the excess fabric from the seam in that center area to reduce bulk. Or, as you can see what I'm doing here, I'm actually going to finesse my seams because I want them to stay open. So I'm finessing them so that they stay open as best that I can. And now that I'm doing the voiceover for this project, I'm realizing probably the first option, where you are just pressing that point nice and flat, is your best option, especially if this is the first time that you've ever sewn a hexagon table topper. Once it's pinned, then sew the 1/4 inch seam along the top edge. And when you are sewing past that center point, try not to sew over those 2 stitches that create the triangle point. This will allow all of your seams to come together nicely in the center. Then take it to your iron and give it a nice press. And if you find that center is a bit bulky, just spend a little bit more extra time with your iron in that section, pressing it flat. Now, the easiest way to put your hexagon table topper together without having to use binding is to buy fusible fleece. That fusible fleece you can cut to the same size as your hexagon table topper, and then press your hexagon table topper onto the glue side of that fusible fleece, being very careful not to get that glue on your iron. And of course, do this following the fusible fleece directions that come with the fusible fleece that you purchase. I will link to a few options in the description down below. Once you've glued it to your fusible fleece, you can quilt it however you want. I like to follow the seams and just use my 1/4 inch sewing foot as a guide. So you can see that my quilting seams are a 1/4 inch in from the actual seam allowance itself, and always start and stop with a back stitch. Once you've quilted it the way that you like, you can trim away that excess fusible, then use this as a template by laying it on top of whatever backing fabric you want, and then cut out the backing fabric to match that hexagon table topper. Then lay both pieces right sides together and pin around the entire outer edge, leaving a 4-inch gap somewhere along that section. I like to mark that with different pins so that I remind myself not to sew across that section. Then take it to your sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the entire outer edge, starting and stopping with a back stitch, but not sewing across that 4-inch opening. Now, before you turn this project right side out, there is one more step that you need to do, and that is snipping away all 6 corners. You just want to snip away a little bit of that excess fabric, making sure, of course, that you do not snip your seam allowance that you've just sewn. Then turn your project right side out and gently with your finger just push out all 6 points. Then take your hexagon table topper to your iron and just give all of those edges a nice press, making sure to fold in that 4-inch opening so that those edges are neatly tucked inside and pin across that edge. Then you will take this to your sewing machine and you will sew a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance around the entire project, sealing in that opening. Of course, start and stop with a back stitch. To fully connect the back fabric to the front fabric, I recommend sewing 3 seams. You will do that stitch in the ditch style along the 3 seams shown here. You can sew right next to that seam or literally right in that seam. Just remember to back stitch when you start and when you stop. That is how easy it is to make a hexagon table topper. Now don't forget, next week I have a nice tutorial for you that is also a hexagon table topper, but it will allow you to center a special piece of fabric right in the middle of your table topper, or you can use directional fabric, and you can even use your scraps. So it's a lot more of a flexible hexagon table topper, but it's not as fast as the version you just watched here. All right, I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.